Okay, so my photos say I have now been approved and we're going to use those in creating the collage. Um, I've gone ahead and turned on my grid and I adjusted it. Okay, so I know that my images are all 5 inches this way by 4 inches this way. And in order to work with the 5 inches, I came in and I changed this so that there's a grid every 1 inch and and I divided it in half. So that when I select, I will be selecting I can select a whole inch, or I can select half an inch, or I can select an inch and a half. And that's the measurement I want to work with, because an inch and a half works with both 4 and 5 inches to allow me to select images. Okay, so here's a issue that Photoshop needs to resolve in the future. I've gone through, and while I used the same color lookup for all of these, some of them did have other filters that we used. And then we created that clipping mask. You cannot edit the clipping mask. So if I start masking the image itself below, I cannot mask that clipping mask with it. So that is unfortunately a problem in Photoshop, that it will not let you create a clipping mask or it will not let you adjust the clipping mask after you've applied it. So what that means is if I come in and I decide I want to cut down layer 12, the clipping mask that I created will still fit to the larger outside. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to, because I use the same clipping mask, I did that to show you guys how to individually edit the photos. Before you do that, you will have cropped your image down to what you want it to be before you'll clip the mask. And in this process, we created the artboards, or the print sheet first, to go through the process of doing this to set these up. What we're going to do is release this. Okay, so for instance, I say I want to work with this image here, which is layer 2. And I've got them linked, but for initially what I'm going to do is hold down my control key and release clipping mask. Okay, now you see it's applied the filter to the whole thing. What I would then do is decide that I want to crop this image and then reapply that clipping mask so that that clipping mask is attached only to what has been cropped. And one of the reasons I did it this way, I know you guys are sort of like, well, why didn't we do it that way from the beginning? And I get that, is so that you'll know how to problem solve. I think sometimes tutorials will show you the right way to do things, but they don't always have time to thoroughly explain everything or explain how to problem shoot. So this is why I want to do it this way, so you can see that if you ever have a situation where you now need to apply a mask after you've applied your clipping mask, how to solve that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is on my layer 2, I'm going to come in here with my marquee tool, and I want to say I want to crop this image to select this part of it. I'm going to select inverse, and you want to make sure before you do anything that you are on that layer 2. Okay, so control layer 2, and I've got everything selected except the piece. So I've inverted that selection. Okay, when you first select it, the marching ants are over what you've selected. I want to select the inverse, and then layer mask, hide selection. And you see that has now cropped my image over here by applying a mask. And this is how masking works. It's a layer on top of the layer where you can apply grayscale. White makes the image completely opaque. Black makes the image completely transparent, which is why, and you see in the mask here, that little tiny white spot corresponds to this area. And so that's what you see. Everything that's black becomes invisible. If you work with shades of gray, it will depend on what the shade of gray is. And also, color will be converted to shades of gray, its corresponding shade of gray. The darker the gray, the more transparent. The lighter the gray, the more opaque. And so you can paint on this, and I'm going to show you very quickly that I'm going to take my brush tool, and my color here is black, and I want you to see what happens when I paint on this. It erases, it makes invisible what I painted additional black on. I'm going to invert this, and now I'm going to paint white, and it shows, it reveals what was hidden. So with masking, we use black and white to allow us to crop an image without destroying the image. And it is always going to be associated with the image. Make sure you're not painting on the image itself, because it will do this. And that's not what we want. Okay, you want to make sure you've selected the mask and that you paint with black and white or shades of gray. And I'll just go ahead and show you that too right quick. Say I'm going to select a shade of gray. Let's go a little bit closer to, yeah, there we go. And then when I paint, you can see the image below, but you see a transparent view of it. Okay, and I'm going to show you how to do this again. So then what I'm going to need to do is come back to my layer adjustment, Control, create clipping mask, and reapply it. Okay, and so now it is just linked to that image. So you have to release it, crop your image, and reattach it, because Photoshop doesn't yet have a way to crop that clipping mask. Okay, so let's do that again. I'm gonna start with, I'm gonna keep this image whole, and I'm gonna build on top of it. So I'm going through and I'm selecting the parts and pieces of my image that I want to use to build on top of this. Okay, and I may decide to clip a little bit more off of this. So say I want to clip more off this layer too. I'm going to come back over here to my clipping mask, and I'm going to use my, there we go. And I'm just going to paint that black. Now you see how I've used that the marquee. It's going to prevent me from coloring anywhere but at that inside this boundary. And I'll show you why that's great, because it allows me to create that very hard edge, and I don't accidentally. Trying to paint this by hand is very hard. So this gives me a hard edge that I can crop to. It is faster to draw a line with a ruler than it is to draw a straight line by hand. And straight line. And try it. Just put a ruler on a piece of paper and just quickly draw a line. Now try to draw the exact same straight line freeform by hand. It's harder. You can't. It takes a longer amount of time. So what this does, this marquee tool, allows you to create that hard edge that allows you to very quickly come in here and crop that. And now, and then I reapply my clipping mask, and now I can bring this in and lay it on top of my image. Now, as I start to work with this, I'm going to decide to make more adjustments based on whether or not I think it's working. I'm not sold that that's what I want to do. I might move this off over here. You're looking, remember, when you're working with these photos on top of photos, you want to think about your leading lines. You want to think about alignment of lines. You're still creating a portrait, and you still want your portrait to meet the principles and elements of design. So as I'm putting this on here, I'm seeing it's not really aligning with anything. And so I may need to make further adjustments to get it to do that. Okay, I'm not happy with that. So let me just move this off over here for now. What I do want to do is come over here and select my layer 10. And I'm going to Control click and release the clipping mask. Control click and release the clipping mask. Now remember, they're all still linked, so they're still good. And I'm going to select my layer 10. I'm going to select, I want to keep, okay, so I want to shift that over. I want the whole tongue, but I don't like where this is aligned. So I can use the arrows on my keyboard to nudge this until I get what I like. And it just moves it a pixel at a time. And you can go, it's those 4 keys, arrow keys in your keyboard, and they just nudge it a pixel at a time to the left or to the right. And I'm going to take that piece, okay? So I'm going to select inverse and layer, layer mask, hide selection. And then I'm going to come back to my clipping masks and I'm going to reattach those. Okay, and so now I can take my image. I'm going to bring it over here. Ooh, okay, so I kind of like what that did. It's kind of cool. But actually what I want to do is I want to think about how this aligns. Let me turn off that. Let me just turn off snap for now. I want to think about how these all align. And I'm going to align, and I'll show you what I'm doing here. I'm aligning the hairline, and I'm aligning the face line. And then I can come back and make additional adjustments. Let's see. We're not trying to be precise, but we're trying to keep our, like, so this, if this leading line continues around here, which it kind of does, I'm still keeping the shape of a face. And now I may want to decide that I'm going to come back to my mask here, and I'm going to cut out some of this down here that I don't think works. And I'm just going to paint it black. Okay, and you can see then what I want to begin to do is go through each one of my photos and decide, I think I want to put another eye on top of that eye. Let's take this one over here. Layer 4. Okay, I'm going to have to release that clipping mask. Control. Release clipping mask. Okay. I'm going to go back to my layer, and I'm going to take this eye. Still working with my grid. I need to turn my snap back on so that I'm working with my grid. And then I'm going to adjust that over. And the reason I start out working on a grid and then fine tune is because if you start out working on a grid, when you work on a grid, it helps with the alignment, which helps you with leading lines, which helps with principles and elements of design. Okay, I'm going to select the inverse. Okay, layer, layer mask, hide selection, and then I'm going to come back up here and reattach my clipping mask. Okay, and so now I can move those onto my image over here. Whoops. Now I have to bring those up in the stack so that it's on top. And now I can put this, whoops, still not at the top. Where'd you go? There we go. And so now I can put that on top of of that eye. And what I'm now going to look at is other alignments. So I'm going to try to align a little bit with my nose or my eyebrow above. That's pretty distorted. And I'm just kind of checking all these lines. You just kind of look at alignments. Does it work? Does it not work? I'm going to bring it down and over a little bit. That's really creating a... So the goal of cubism is to sort of align it up and then shift it just enough that it's a clearly an intentional shift and an adjustment, so that you're still following your leading lines without, getting too far off or too close. It's just sort of this balance between alignment and the style of art. And you're going to want to keep going with this until you have gone through and applied all of your photos. And I'm going to suggest you go through and you do this one time, and then you do it a second time. Because the second time you do it, usually you get a better result. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue in the next image. In the next video, excuse me.